Madam Rajavi, all those dedicated to freedom and peace for the great people of Iran who are gathered to listen to this broadcast. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to address you, particularly at a time of year where we're used to getting together in New York, in front of the United Nations. We've been doing it, I've been doing it at least with you for, my goodness, it seems like 15, 16 years. And we've been through a lot. And if I think back to the first time I was there, which I believe was in 2008, things have changed a lot. And although we'd like to see it change even more, and it will, you have made a lot of progress, particularly under the leadership of Madam Rajavi. Now, the regime is showing every indication that they're on their last legs by every historical measure. It's true, that isn't reported as widely or as strongly as it should be. It's a story that isn't even known all that well in America, because there is, I believe, an unholy alliance with much of the left-wing press to protect the Iranian regime of terror. Hard for me to understand why. Everyone knows, whether it's the left-wing press or the Europeans who appease them, that they are a regime of terror. That from the day they started, back in the late 1970s until now, every year is a year of slaughter, deprivation of human rights, imprisonment. Probably the worst record in the world. Probably the regime that's killed more of its own people, and without any doubt, the regime that sponsors terrorism more than anyone else. And despite that, they receive support from nations that should know better. And that's something we have to change. What we don't have to change is the strong resolve of the administration in Washington. The United States is finally on the right side and on the side of freedom and democracy. For too long, over the prior 8 years to the Trump administration, the United States, without any doubt, was much strongly sympathetic to Iran than it was to our cause, or to Israel, or to the Arab states. It seemed like a priority to obtain a meaningless, actually a dangerous nuclear agreement. Such a priority that the prior administration gave the regime of terror, even though it's a sponsor of terrorism, over $1 billion in cash. At least that's what we know about. Again, why? There's no reason for it, nor is there any reason for the European governments refusing to impose the highest possible sanctions on Iran, as the United States is doing, and as hopefully will be the case when the UN sanctions, I believe it is tomorrow, snap back. The only thing that has shown any sign that you can affect this regime are sanctions. And since the administration has changed from an administration that was very conciliatory to Iran, appeasing Iran as much, if not more, than the European governments, to an administration that has imposed sanctions, there's been a complete difference in what's going on there. So when Donald Trump first came into office, he merely began enforcing the sanctions that were already there. That was even before he imposed new sanctions. And immediately, there was a substantial impact on Iran, which says to me that the prior administration really wasn't even enforcing the sanctions that were in place. We kind of knew that, but the best demonstration of that is the first 4 or 5 months of the new administration, and all of a sudden you see a much, much bigger impact on the economy of Iran. And then successively, those sanctions have been made more severe, and we have had some others join us in enforcing sanctions in a more honest way. We still don't have anywhere near everyone. That pressure has brought about the protests in Iran that started two years ago and have remained continuous and get more and more support. It began, of course, with people who have been fighting for freedom for forever, from the beginning of the regime, and people who have dedicated themselves to that. But now it extends way beyond that to the general population. So you see protests by teachers, you see protests by bus drivers, you see protests by other professions and industries, and people who have suffered because the regime simply doesn't take care of its people, as well as at will slaughters them. And we found in the history of overthrowing monsters like this that very, very often the thing that does it is the deprivation of material goods, particularly food. And that's happening in Iran. So the world is now facing a crucial question. And it goes to the policy on Iran. And the dispute is around whether the arms embargo against the regime should be lifted or more severe sanctions should be imposed. Tomorrow, the 30-day required for the reimposition of the UN sanctions will run out. By every indication, including the statement by the Secretary General of the United Nations, it will be reimposed. And that's critical to keep at least the status quo in place. But we have to go beyond that. This is the time to do it. When you have them on the ropes, this is the time to apply even more pressure. Other countries, including the Europeans, have refused to fully support the United States. And it's an act really of supreme cowardice. All these European governments claim to be dedicated to freedom and democracy and the love of human rights and wanting to see a world in which people are treated fairly and decently. And think of the French Revolution coming after the American Revolution based on those principles. Well, the French have abandoned those principles. And so have many of the other European countries, because they've turned their back on a barbaric regime with which they are doing business and also failing to use recommended and proven methods of pressure that could deliver the Iranian people from bondage. Don't understand it, except greed. I don't understand it because all of these regimes, well, not all, but all of these European countries try to lecture all of us on human rights, try to lecture the United States, they try to lecture everyone. And they supposedly have great regard for human rights. What about the human rights of the Iranians? What about the human rights of countries that the Iranians have dramatically damaged by their support for terrorism? And I just present the logical proposition to them that if they agree that Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism, there's no dispute about that. That means that all of the money that they are giving to Iran through whatever commercial arrangements they have, despite the money they're making, and all the help that it gives Iran with their turning their eyes and turning their back from the barbaric acts of the Iranian regime, all of that is getting people killed. If you give money to an organization that's the biggest sponsor of terrorism, then I don't know. Don't you realize that that money is going to terrorists? And what do terrorists do? They kill people. I found it disgusting, horrible, and I thought illegal for the president of the United States to turn over to them in cash over $1 billion. First of all, I found it's being turned over in cash the way criminals do it. Reminds me of the drug transactions and the illegal arms trade that I used to prosecute as the United States attorney. To turn over cash to a regime that murders more people than just about any regime on earth by a United States president shows some real deterioration in America's honor morality, and really care for human rights and human suffering. They're one of the most embarrassing and damaging acts in American foreign policy, only to be exceeded by the agreement that was reached, allowing Iran to become a nuclear power. Of course, they were part of the same thing, because the cash came along with the agreement. Not enough that we're going to let them become a nuclear power. Also gave them money. Of course, the perpetrators who did it say, oh, they were owed the money because the money had been tied up. No, they weren't owed the money. They're not the proper regime of Iran. They took it in a violent revolution. And then a second violent revolution with the people that they had originally succeeded in overthrowing the Shah. They double-crossed those people and killed very, very, very many of them. And if we would pay attention to Iran with just a little bit of concentration beyond the cover-ups that we get in the New York Times and the Washington Post, and where the Iranian propaganda machine has somehow prevailed, they are presently killing people, in some cases at record rates. They certainly are killing people associated with us. They're killing people way beyond that as well. They're a regime that's desperate now, and desperate regimes strike out very, very harshly. And that's probably one of the best indications that they are. It has not changed in Iran. It's worse, and it's getting worse. I mean, just recently, they executed the wrestling champion, Navid Afaki. His only crime was he was doing what hundreds of thousands have done in the United States, sometimes to the point of creating riots in the United States. Of course, they're all protected, all those people. But Mr. Afaki lost his life because he was protesting the barbarity of the regime, which is not in dispute, that they are barbaric. Mustafa Salahi was very recently executed for the same crime. In just recent days, the MEK announced that at least 29 political prisoners are on death row. They execute more people than any country on earth, and they execute more people for non-crimes than anyone. The crime these 29 people, I believe, are charged with, and I shouldn't even say convicted, because I don't think they have a proper method for determining whether somebody's innocent or guilty. But if they're guilty of opposing the regime. Opposing the regime. And that isn't a barbaric dictatorship that you should not be doing business with. I mean, some of them are condemned to death under the charge enmity to God. Now we're going back to the Inquisition, the Salem witch hunts, superstitious murders. Where in any decent understanding of God is the notion that people are executed in his name, any more than using airplanes to crash into buildings and to kill thousands of innocent people is somehow sanctioned by God. No, it's sanctioned by Satan, and it's satanic and demonic rather than holy acts. A report published by Amnesty International just on September 2nd, 2020 is called, and this title tells you all, Trampling Humanity, Mass Arrest, Disappearance, and Torture since Iran's 2019 November protests. Trampling humanity, mass arrest, disappearance, and torture since Iran's 2019 November protests. If you need any further proof that Iran is still the regime of terror that it has always been, that Iran is a cold-blooded murderer of its own people, that Iran exports terrorism to other places so that other innocent people are killed, then just read this report or just exercise your common sense and look. Please don't become like the cowardly Europeans and back away. And my goodness, please don't back away for greed. There's not enough money for people to sell their souls, is there? I guess in Europe, there is. If you think the Iranian people are going to suffer from this, yes, they will suffer from it. The way the people of South Africa suffered from sanctions, only to have that be the thing that delivered freedom to them. Well, people of Iran are willing to suffer for freedom. They're willing to die for freedom, as they show. Why wouldn't they be willing to suffer deprivation for freedom? 300 Iranian associations representing the vast diversity of the Iranian diaspora have issued a joint statement demanding reimposition. And there are 200 European parliamentarians have also made it clear on the record that they want to maintain the arms embargo, they want to reimpose the UN sanctions, and would like to go further. The regime of terror has increased its terrorist activities. I gave you some examples. There are many, many more against the Iranian opposition, that is, against the National Council of Resistance of Iran and the MEK. Just a few examples that I know of personally, or I should say a few examples that personally involve me, and then a few that I know of. I still remember as if it was yesterday, the New Year's celebration in March of 2018 that I was invited to, and very honored to be invited to, by Madame Rajavi, and we did it together. And of course, I was quite surprised, I should not have been, that 4 people were arrested either that day or the day before in Albania for planning to bomb us, including an Iranian diplomat. So there's no question it was coming directly from Iran. And then that same year, a few months later, another group of 4 people were arrested in Belgium or France, right on the border, with explosives and plans to come and bomb our convention on June 30th of 2018, with the intention of killing Madame Rajavi and as many of us as possible. And since then, there have been other incidents not having gotten to exactly that dramatic a level. So, yes, the people of Iran are suffering, but I want you to know, every time you come to one of these events, there's always a risk. And the fact that you come when we have them shows tremendous courage and your great, great love for freedom. Three things must be the priorities: the suffering of the Iranian people under this regime and their desire for change. They're suffering more than most people in the world, but their desire for change is close to universal. They've had enough of this regime, and not only are they aware now of many of their atrocities and barbarity, but they're suffering from the normal thing that usually brings about overthrow of these horrible regimes, and that is deprivation at a very, very basic level. Very basic level. It's a shame that it has to be done that way. It would be better if it could be done another way. But I mean, short of war, there is no other way to do it. Second, preventing the regime from obtaining nuclear weapons. This is a necessity for the preservation of the world, but certainly for the preservation of Iran. A regime as rationally unhinged as Iran is certainly not a regime that should be entrusted with nuclear weapons. I mean, they could initiate something that would end up in the complete destruction of Iran and destruction of other places in the world. That's not something that civilized people should have to worry about. And whatever agreement there is with Iran, it cannot contemplate Iran being a nuclear power. It must be a nation that forgoes nuclear weapons in order to keep the region and the world safe, and in order to keep Iran safe. And then finally, there must be an end to the regime's destructive meddling in the activities of other countries in the region and terrorism all throughout the world. That idea that they're the largest sponsor of terrorism, they want to make peace. They can't sponsor terrorism. Terrorism and peace don't go together. Making agreements with people that continue to sponsor terrorism are just agreements in name only. In fact, they're even more dangerous. Better to recognize your enemy and keep them under very close surveillance rather than getting fooled by a phony agreement. The real solution and the right policy for all countries is to decide with the Iranian people. Every decent person knows that in the soul of the Iranian citizen, educated people, cultured people, with a tradition and a civilization that goes back more than most. There is a burning desire to be able to control their own lives, to be able to control their own nation, to be able to be a proud nation that is respected all over the world rather than despised because of the murder that's done both within its own country and throughout the world. This organization that is sponsoring this discussion, whether we say the MEK or the NCRI, presents a dramatic democratic alternative to this regime of terror. They have a government in waiting that can take Iran through the transition. We're not facing what we faced in other Arab and countries in the region. We're not facing the, oh my goodness, what will follow them? Will it be worse? Well, it was worse in Egypt. Arguably, it was worse in Libya because we hadn't focused on not so much who would permanently replace. That ends up taking about a year and a half to figure out the process by which you make a fair decision. But we have a government in exile that's been developed with care, so you wouldn't lose any time in making sure that the country moves forward with great prosperity. And for that, and for assembling that, we owe Madam Rajavi just a great debt of gratitude. Iran is deathly afraid of Madam Rajavi's whole vision for a future Iran. Let's just see if we can summarize it. Her 10 points, we'll summarize the most important ones. Madam Rajavi wants to have a free Iran. Madam Rajavi wants to have an Iran in which the president, prime minister, legislators are selected by the people. And she will act as an interim leader, but won't act for any lengthy period of time. And she'll subject herself, and everyone will, to elections. An Iran that has a rule of law, that has courts that are actually fair to people and allow people who are being subjugated by the governments or other powerful forces to go somewhere and be able to stop it. A police and a criminal justice system that's a fair one. And also a country that respects human rights, does away with capital punishment. Exactly what is very much needed in that region. It would be a very strong stabilizing force. There are many more things that she wants to do, but the most important thing to think about is she wants to create a modern democracy, a modern republic, and a government that is founded on, based on, the same core principles of the United States of America: liberty, equality, free speech, freedom of religion, women being part of the government, which is symbolized by her leading the government and having many women in the ministry positions and the secondary positions. This would be a wonderful thing for the Middle East and for the country to see this happen. It would indicate that we're turning the corner on Muslim or Islamic extremist terrorism, and that there are so many good people that are broadly, looked at in that umbrella of Muslim and Arab, and there are feelings of fear. There shouldn't be. Most people among the Arab people and the Muslim people are good people. Through working so long and so hard with the MEK, they've taught me a great deal. So, you have my support. Anything I can do to get to the result of a non-nuclear, free Iran with a government that allows the people to select and a government that protects the rights of the people. Oh, that would be such a great day. And I'm looking forward to, in that day, coming to Tehran with you and celebrating the return of the great capital of Tehran and Iran, and the great contribution of the Persian people to the civilization of the world. Again, my heartfelt thanks to Madam Rajavi, to Farzeen, to her entire group of supporters. I had the pleasure last year of staying with them for several days and getting to know them. And these are good people. They're doing this to try to save their country. And they are making progress. They'll make even more progress with more support. And I plead with the European representatives to this gathering to cooperate, to give them some of the room that they need to make tough and difficult decisions. So once again, thank you very much. Thank you for your tremendous dedication to this cause. And maybe next year I'll see you in Toronto. Be great. God bless you.